Hot topic recently has been those high property taxes for agriculture lands, and we're going to kind of get some more in depth with that and what we can expect during this next legislative section. For the Rural Radio Network, I'm Jesse Harding. Joining us is Steve Nelson, who's president of the Nebraska Farm Bureau. Can you tell us what some of those bills are coming up and what we can expect to see?
Well, there's several bills, and probably what the expectation would be that as we move through the hearing process at the legislature, that committees will put together a package of maybe moving a couple of these different ideas together, and so at some point we will probably see a package that looks at the bills, or maybe at least the bills may come out of the committees separately, but they'll be part of something that's maybe broader in the thinking.
Now, we do have 4 separate bills. Can you kind of run through us what those 4 different ones are and how they all are affected to the property tax issue?
Right. There's a couple bills that talk about lowering the valuation for ag property from 75% to 65% or to 55%. The bill lowering property to 55%, that would be just used in the calculation for school funding. The bill that takes it from 75 to 65 would be a direct reduction that would result in direct property tax relief. Those 2 bills, even though they sound a lot alike because you talk about the percentages, really have some different effects. They both have some good effects from an agriculture, farm and ranch perspective, but there are some differences there. Then there's another bill that would add $60 million a year into the property tax credit program. That program today is funded with $140 million per year from the state budget. That would go to $200 per year. That's direct property tax relief that comes back from the state to property taxpayers, and that is split to both homeowners and to farm and ranch property. About 75% actually going to non-ag property, and about 25% of that to ag property. So those 2 bills, working together, provide some pretty good property tax relief. Then there's a third bill that would send 20% of the income tax that's collected in a school district, directly back to that school district. This is a bill that can really provide some reform to the system, because not only does that add that additional amount of money into the funding resources for a school district, it also changes the calculation in the state aid formula and starts to include income as part of the wealth calculation. So a number of good things that happen there from a bringing balance and equity to the system perspective.
And it is kind of a tricky subject because you do have to worry about those schools and how they're going to get some of that funding. So moving forward, are we going to be able to see maybe some of these ideas intertwine and come together to form maybe one solid or 2 solid bills as we move forward? How are we going to get there with these several different ideas floating around?
Sure. Well, it could happen a number of ways. It could be, more than one separate bill that when you combine those together in law that would have a certain effect. Or, it could be that the bills are actually brought together into one type of a piece of legislation that's acted on that way. I think what's maybe important to note is that even though this certainly it would be of interest to schools and to local county governments, that what we're talking about here is really not about whether we support education or whether we support the things that local counties need to do. This is really about bringing equity to the tax system. And right now, the tax system has become very inequitable to the disfavor of farmers and ranchers. We have about 3% of the population paying almost 30% of the total property tax, that 3% being farmers and ranchers, an imbalance there. We've had growth in property tax in the last 10 years at about 162% over that period of time, compared to non-ag property at about 48% during that period of time. So it's it's not about whether those things that we fund are important. This is about balancing who pays for it, how it gets paid, and bringing equity to that. And that equity has gotten way out of balance over the last few years.
What has Farm Bureau really like to see? What would you maybe like to see come together as things move forward? What are the best aspects of this?
Well, I think there's good pieces here. All of the things that we've talked about would be good. There's some additional things, that would control the growth of spending. There's some legislation that talks about that. We think that would be important. All of these things together, I think that they're all good and all move in the right direction in the end. And that the bill that brings the income tax into the state aid formula is probably of the three, and they're all important, and we're not saying that we should do one over the other, but that's the one that starts to bring reform into the system. That will be the one that over a period of time it brings the most equity to the system. The other two bills are really about just rebalancing the fact that we've gotten so far out of balance because of rising land values in the last few years. They bring the pendulum back to the center. The other bill really brings reform to our system. So they're all very important, and we're going to work very hard to make sure that all of these bills are passed.
Now, when we were on the phone with them a couple weeks ago with both senators that have proposed these bills, they said this has been an ongoing issue. What's going to need to happen next to make sure that changes do start happening?
Well, I think it's a very good question, because a lot of people will tell you that there's never been more momentum than there is today to deal with these issues. The Property Tax Modernization Committee, a committee of the legislature, went around the state a year or two ago and heard all across the state, both from farm and ranch property owners and from non-farm and ranch property owners, that property is paying too much. And I've talked about that as we've gone through here. The numbers really spell that out. But what we do know for sure is that this isn't going to be an easy task, even though there's a lot of recognition of the problem, that in the end it's going to take a majority of senators to vote for this, and we're going to have to work very, very hard, both as farmers and ranchers and all Nebraskans, really, to make sure that we get these kinds of changes that bring balance to our tax system.
Now, whether you're a Farm Bureau member or not, it is an important issue. Where can some people find some more information on all the bills, and what can they do to get involved and make sure things happen? Well,
certainly from a Farm Bureau perspective, we would say become a Farm Bureau member, get involved with your local county Farm Bureau. Whether you're a Farm Bureau member or not, we can provide you with all kinds of information related to this. Most importantly, the constituents need to talk to their senators. It will be the senators that decide this issue. It's your local senator, your state senator, that will make the vote on whether or not we have these kinds of changes. And the most important thing that people can do is to talk to their state senator, to share their situation, to talk about how they view the issue, and encourage their senators to support these kinds of changes.
Talking about those property tax issues that we're seeing here in Nebraska and what you can do to get involved in what's being done and the legislation as well. That's been the Nebraska Farm Bureau President, Steve Nelson, and you're listening to the Rural Radio Network. I'm Jessie Harding.